listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
I bought a stack of comic books at the thrift store the other day. And my wife's always asking, why are you buying these comic books? And I always go, well, there's something about comic books that, it reminds me of my youth. It's an art medium all unto itself. The way the pages unfold, the way the story unfolds, the way you refer back to the cover to see if that scene is actually in there and that sort of thing, And I bought a whole stack of comics. And sometimes at the swap meet, I'll find a box and I'll just end up buying more than I should. I don't know what I'm going to do with these. I've got boxes in the garage. Every collector, toys, Hot Wheels, you name it, baseball card collectors, doesn't matter. They all have a box of comics. It's just something that we do. There's something that draws us to comic books, and you can't escape it. I mean, I can see my wife's face at the swap, and she goes, "Oh, he's found a box of comics." And I'll go, I have to look through these. I don't know what's in here. And in those boxes of comics, I have found some reasonably rare issues of modern day. Forget about the old ones. You never find old comics at the swap meet anymore. Everybody knows those are valuable. But I found like Star Wars, the last issue 107, or the G.I. Joe issue that has no dialogue. It's just Snake Eyes rescuing, what's her name? Scarlet. Those are valuable. Even something silly like Sonic #1. I know that these are valuable. I know the ones that are like, you gotta have, And part of those comics, and part of comics lore, is Tales from the Crypt. And how, for a short time, and it wasn't in modern day, this is long ago, horror comics reigned supreme. And these things were snatched up as quick as they were put on the magazine rack. And kids, this is before my time. My time, comics I got old enough to read comics. I was reading mostly Marvel, DC, and then, as I got older, Image. But kids back in the day, man, they had these horror comics and Tales. Everybody knows Tales from the Crypt from the TV show, from the movies, from the Cryptkeeper. The very well-known character of the Cryptkeeper. But these things always go through an evolution. They're constantly evolving from one form into another. And what started out as horror comics, which were condemned by everybody back in the day. Every parents group was terrified. Every church group was horrified. This is going to lead to the downfall of society. Kids are reading horror comics where people are chopped up and stabbed, and they get their comeuppance, and they're disemboweled and all that. So they had to evolve. The comics code stepped in the 50s and made everybody get in line and have to submit their comics for somebody, I'm going to get the comics code right. I wasn't around back then. But there was oversight because people thought the content here was going to ruin the youth of America. But that didn't stop them, If you're a creator, if you're a creative person, there are no walls you can put up to stop you from creating. You've seen painters lose their arms and paint with their mouths. Richard Christie from, not Richard Christie, that's from Howard Stern. But Christie Brown from My Left Foot painting with his left foot. So, if you're creative, you will find a way to be creative. So these guys just morphed into other things. And I'm sure that they'd always had the idea that, look, these horror comics could probably be a TV show or a movie at some point. The world wasn't ready for it back in the 50s and 60s. But they got their shot because by 1972, we'd already had the whole round of the Hammer horror films, and the Universal horror films had run their course by that point and had slipped into parody. And the time was right for an actual Tales from the Crypt movie. Now, I'm from 71 up. So 1972, I'm only 1 year old, so I have no concept of this. If you say to me Tales from the Crypt, I will talk about the HBO show that ran for years, that was executive produced by, among many others, Robert Zemeckis, who directed the pilot episode of it, which was a woman at home being terrorized by a maniac in a Santa Claus costume. They had a couple of movies. They had Tales from the Crypt Demon Night, and Tales from the Crypt Bordello of Blood. I think Demon Night was written by Bob Gale. So Zemeckis and Gale, they're constantly weaving themselves in and out of my life, And the HBO show got a lot of talent involved. A lot of actors stepped behind the camera to direct episodes, and a lot of good writers were enlisted to come up with the plots and the scripts. And when a good friend of mine, CW, and his wife, Elizabeth, introduced me, they said, look, we want you to watch this movie. And they said, it's Tales from the Crypt. I said, I've already seen Tales from the Crypt. Like, no, it's this other Tales from the Crypt. And I go, oh, so many other. Now, the idea that the title Tales from the Crypt, I mean, that's a pretty generic title, Tales from the Crypt. But it has been owned singly since its inception. So I didn't know that this film from 1972 is canon. It's part of the Tales from the Crypt comic book series. It's a low budget, really slow horror movie. But that's indicative of the time. They didn't put a lot of money into horror movies, unless you count like The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby from that time period. Horror movies always get the short shrift as far as budget, because the idea is you make these things, they're schlock, you put them out, they make a ton of money, we make more money. That's why there's 17 Saw movies and 10 Paranormal Activity movies, right? How many Insidious and Conjuring are there? These are cash cows, folks, but they don't spend a lot of money on them. But that's okay, because you don't have to spend a lot of money on a movie to make a good movie. Clerks was made for under $50,000. It's about plot. It's about script. It's about using what you have at your disposal and using it creatively, right? So my friends gave me this disc, and I've hemmed and hawed because, this is Halloween haunt season, and I work nights some nights and days some days. I mean, you can tell my voice is a little off today because my nose is giving me trouble. So I apologize. I've got 2 more Patreon reviews stacked and racked in my head, so I just have to sit down and make myself do these. It's easy to get lost in other things, and I'm editing book 4, and that's no excuse, but it's hard to say to somebody on the go, stop, watch this movie for 2 hours, then go talk about it. Now, I enjoy doing that, but I find it more difficult each day in the life that I have chosen to make time for that. So I just said, screw it, I'm going to watch it today, and I'm going to talk about it today, and it'll be fun. It'll be a treat. I'm giving myself a treat. Treat yourself, right? So the movie opens, and it's funny because it opens with the da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. It opens with the typical Phantom of the Opera music, and it's just a graveyard with crypts, and it just goes on. It's one of those movies like they don't do it now, right? But there was a time where because of the way the unions worked, you had to put all the credits at the beginning. So this movie's not going to start until everybody has had their due up front. They run credits at the end, but the credits at the end are quite short because they've already done it up front, right? So it goes on and on and on and da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, and then finally you see like this monk guy, and I thought he was unlocking a gate and like gonna come towards me and tell me a story, and instead he just locks it and walks away, and I'm like, oh, there he goes, sir. No, he's gone. And so the movie then cuts to what looks like a bunch of tourists taking a trip through some famous crypts, and catacombs. And he's very insistent not to wander off. So this group of 5, they stick together. And they end up at a dead end, and then a chamber door, a wall, a rock opens, and they go inside, and it closes behind them, and that's it. They're stuck inside there. And there they meet the guy in a robe. I assume it's the same guy from the beginning because he's wearing the same brown robe. Now, I had to look this guy up. It turns out he's one of those guys, British actor. He looks so familiar. He's been in a million movies. One of the most famous British character actors of all time, right? Ralph Richardson, I believe his name is. I knew him right away as he was God in Time Bandits. But he makes these people sit down and tells them he has a purpose. He's very clear. I have a purpose. Okay. Again, it's really slow moving movie. But finally he gets to it. And there's this weird moment, and this is the interesting part of the film. And I caught on to this early because, if you write screenplays, if you watch enough movies, if you pay attention, you know that there's nothing in there by chance. There's no accidents in a movie script. Everything, if it's a good script, must build upon what happened prior, so that at the end, nothing comes out of left field. So there's 4 men and a woman, and the woman is Joan Collins from Dynasty back in her heyday. I mean, this is a beautiful, beautiful young Joan Collins. And she drops her brooch. You're like, oh, okay. Well, she dropped her brooch. Then they find it very quickly. I think it's lost from her shirt for about a second, right? But I just was like, well, what's with the brooch? Okay, I guess that's going to come into play at some point, right? So they're all sitting down in this chamber with the guy in the robe. And spoiler alert, he's eventually, I think in the credits, he's called the Cryptkeeper. In the film, I don't think that he doesn't say that about himself. And they don't know to say that. So he's just guy in robe in the movie. But in the credits, he's listed as the actual Cryptkeeper, which I thought was interesting because, the Cryptkeeper's taken on many forms through the comics. He didn't become that puppet until, the TV show. And that was Kevin Yeager who did that amazing puppet, But we'll get to that. So Joan Collins is the first to speak up. She doesn't know why we're here, and he's like, "Don't you know?" So suddenly, like out of nowhere, I see. Here's the thing: I've never seen this movie. I don't know how it's going to unfold. So I kind of got look. I know it's going to be an anthology of sorts. Because Tales from the Crypt, they're all anthologies. That's just the way they go. They don't tell the Bordello of Blood and Demon Knight do tell, hour and a half, hour 45-minute stories. But that's never been their forte. It's always been very small, bite-sized stories of something happens, somebody does something terrible, and something worse happens to them. That's kind of their motif, right? So it jump cuts to Christmas, and it's a Christmas scene of a fire and Christmas carols and a Christmas tree. And I was a little like, well, what the hell's happening? First, it's jarring. And second, it's Christmas. So it was a little weird. And what's indicative of most of the movie, there's a couple of little things that are contrary to this. But most of the movie is shot completely brightly lit. There's not a lot of shadows, not a lot of darkness. The evil is right on display for you to see. And I think that's what that's the part that makes Tales from the Crypt so interesting, is that you've got this idea that it's going to be deep down in the catacombs, and we do have that in there, but they're not that dark. There's torches and lights. And modern day horror is mostly always in the dark. Cobwebs, scary forests, cabin in the woods, that sort of thing. But this one's all completely lit like a television show. And if you want to know what that means, watch an episode of Star Trek, The Next Generation, where it's lit like a TV show, where everything is lit. Then watch the movie where suddenly the bridge is in full shadow. Red Letter Media goes on and on about this, and they're totally right. It is very different. It's a different look to it. So this Tales from the Crypt movie is completely bright, especially, I mean, it's Christmas, and you see a guy put a present under the tree for his wife, and then he sits down to read the paper, and a second later he's murdered. He drops dead with this completely, Technicolor red paint, blood everywhere, right? And you look up, it's Joan Collins, it's his wife. She's conked him on the head with the fire poker. So you're like, well, that didn't take long. She's a terrible murdering person. And she checks on her little girl who's upstairs, and the little girl's waiting for Santa Claus. And then you're like, now she's got this dead body to deal with downstairs. And here's where the film takes a weird little turn. She opens the gift that the husband put under the tree. And it's a brooch. It's the brooch from the catacombs. And that's like a weird kind of, well, the Crypt Keeper is showing these people what's going to happen. So it's very confusing. I was like, I hang on, because I don't know where we're going with this. So she's trying to get rid of the body. She takes it and throws it down the basement stairs, and then puts his blood everywhere like he's fallen down the stairs, right? And at that moment, the radio tells her that a madman has escaped from the insane asylum, and he's wearing a Santa Claus outfit. So I was like, oh, well, this is totally connected to modern day Tales from the Crypt and the comic book, because this is the Zemeckis story. The first version, Zemeckis remade. I had no idea it was a remake. I knew that it was a comic book issue, but I didn't know it was a full-on remake. So, I know exactly where we're at with this. So she goes around trying to lock the doors, because as soon as the radio is done telling her that the madman's on the loose, he shows up at her house. You know what I mean? Imagine if life was like that, if you saw a pizza commercial and then all of a sudden there's a pizza guy at the door. But that would be great. It'd be like when Wonka Vision sends chocolate through the camera, but instead it's a madman dressed as Santa Claus, right? So she's trying to stay one step ahead of this guy by locking all the windows, locking all the doors. And she grabs the phone to call the police, but she realizes she can't, because she's got a dead body in the house. And that, I've kind of, gone back and forth. Now she decides to throw it down the steps and maybe call the cops, and they'll either assume the psycho guy did it or he fell down the stairs, and she's off the hook, right? But what happens is she goes to check on the little girl, and the little girl's not in bed anymore. And the little girl's at the front door, and she goes, "Mommy, Santa's here, and I let him in." And then the Santa Claus murders Joan Collins. And that's the end of the story. It's very short. It's right to the point. And it's dark. I mean, it's really dark. So we cut back to the catacombs, and we meet the next guy. Now, it's a series of 4 British guys. They're probably character actors, but I don't recognize them. They're before my time. The first guy kisses his wife goodnight, his kids goodbye, and he goes off to live with his girlfriend. Like, he's the biggest scumbag in the world, because he's leaving his wife forever in the middle of the night to go live with Susan. And Susan's leaving her little flat around the corner, and they're moving to another city together. And of course, he falls asleep in the car. She decides to drive. And next thing you know, the car goes over avoids a big truck and goes over the embankment and crashes and burns up, right? And this is one of those cases where you don't have a budget, so you just make do. So the car wreck is just a series of shots of him throwing himself against the glass and her screaming and the camera spinning, and then cut to black. And then when it comes back up, the car's on fire. So he stumbles out of the car. And then it becomes this bizarre point of view where all you see is his gloved hand, right? So he's stumbling around, and he meets a hobo who runs off, and a motorist who won't look at him and runs off, and he decides to go home. He decides to walk all the way back home. And when he gets there, the name on the front has changed. And when his wife opens the door, she's already remarried. And he's like you don't see his face, but he's like, what the hell is going on? And so he stumbles over to the girlfriend's apartment, and it's fully furnished again. It's not empty. And she opens the door, but she's blind. And she's like, who are you? And he's like, well, I'm your boyfriend. And she's like, no, he died in the car wreck 2 years ago. And he's like, 2 years ago? What the hell? So the glass coffee table, he looks in it, and he's like this burnt up corpse thing. And then he wakes up in the car again. Bad dream. And then, of course, the car goes over the embankment again. And he's caught in some loop. And again, it's just meant to it's just a little snapshot of terror, a little slice of horror, and then they move on to something else. And I think if I had to guess, they get progressively a little longer as you're going, because the final one's quite long. Like, they just get a little longer as you go, right? So that's the first two. The third is a complete ripoff of the Monkey's Paw. If you've ever read Monkey's Paw, they buy this monkey's paw that gives them 3 wishes, and it ruins their whole life because it keeps the son gets killed, and they bring the son back, and then the son gets banished, and it's a great little play and a great little moral lesson of be careful what you wish for. So this guy's bankrupt, he's out of money, and he has to sell off all of his worldly goods, and he discovers a jade statue that says will give him 3 wishes. So his wife wishes for more money, and he's like, listen, that's just nonsense. But as he's driving somewhere, he dies, and she's convinced, like, look, I did this to him. Because she gets a big check for his life insurance. So they deliver the body. And she's like, well, I wish he was the way he was. I wish he was alive. So he starts thrashing about in the coffin. And the guy's like, look, he's dead. And you're bringing him back to life. He's in total misery. And the thing is, he's been embalmed. So each wish just keeps getting worse and worse and worse for this poor woman. And again, it's another one of those things of be careful what you wish for. And, bad things happen and we have to deal with them. But the fourth one was interesting. It's a really snooty rich guy who is trying to buy the house across the street. Him and his dad want to buy it and bulldoze it. But it's occupied by this very friendly old man named Mr. Grimsdike, which is the perfect English name, Grimsdike. And Mr. Grimsdike collects trash. He gets old toys out of the trash and fixes them and gives them to the children. And he's happy with his dogs, and he talks to his dead wife. And the interesting part is it's played by Peter Cushing. Now, Peter Cushing was in all of the Hammer horror movies, and he was also Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars. And we know him primarily as a bad guy. I mean, his prominent cheekbones and his sunken eyes make him a bad guy. I mean, he was a vampire hunter in a couple of movies, but he's always on the edge, right? And here he is in this Tales from the Crypt movie as like the good guy, this really friendly old man. And it was really hard to watch this guy across the street destroy this guy's life. He takes away his dogs. He tells the children of the city to stay away from him, and he gets the guy he gets fired. Like, it's really, really tragic, right? And through it all, Peter Cushing tries to have a good face for it. He tries to be and think positive. And ultimately, on Valentine's Day, because, a lot of these horror things always revolve around a holiday. We already had Christmas, and this one's Valentine's Day. The thing is, they don't put the title of the issue on the screen. It's just, these are the stories. So, on Valentine's Day, the snooty guy sends Peter Cushing like 100 Valentines, all with rhyming to get the hell out, because nobody likes you, and drop dead, and drown yourself. And when the guy doesn't show up in town for a while, when they go check on him, he's hung himself. He's dead. And then the last scene, like, what's coming. If you've seen Creep Show or any of these other movies, you know exactly what's coming, right? Because the snooty guy has to get his comeuppance. Snooty, rich British guys always get their comeuppance, right? Whether it's from Rodney Dangerfield or Peter Cushing, they get their comeuppance. So the really ham-fisted dialogue where this guy's like, "Oh yes, it's Valentine's Day. 1 year ago, we sent those cards across the street. It's been 1 year. We get it, man. It's been 1 year. Okay, how long has it been? It's been 1 year. Oh, really? Yes, 1 year since we sent those cards. We get it, dude. So that night, Peter Cushing's corpse. I don't know why he waited a year so he could be on Valentine's Day, I guess, right? He digs himself out of the ground and shambles over to this guy's house and rips the guy's heart out and writes a little poem about it. So it's a lot like Creepshow. You can see where a lot of modern day horror movies like borrowed from Tales from the Crypt, whether it's the comics or this movie or both. You can just really see like we all, every generation thinks whatever they're getting is the first. They have no idea that it's a remake, redo, reboot, restart, whatever, Everybody thinks, I'm the first one here. And you're like, no, you're not the first one here, right? But then it leads into its final story, and that's the final one's quite long. But it was interesting because I just had a conversation at work with one of the designers who makes haunt mazes, Daniel, and he was telling me about a scene in a movie, and I didn't know it was this movie, so I'm excited to go back to work and go, I saw the scene you're talking about. I know exactly what it is, right? It's about the last snooty, rich British guy who he gets a job taking care of a home for the blind. So there's all these blind men, and he's like their caretaker, right? He's like the Miss Hannigan of blind men. And they're all these really old guys. I guess they don't have families to take care of them, and they're a burden to people, so they've been stuck in this poor home. And this guy is a real piece of work, this new boss, this new caretaker. He's got a dog that he keeps with him named Shane. And anytime somebody gets out of line, he threatens Shane on them. And one by one, he just starts taking away their lives, like he cuts the heat so it's cold at night and tells them, well, it's 8:00, you can go to bed, there's nothing to see anyways, you're blind. Then he cuts their food rations in half. He's like, you'll be fine, I have to keep this up. And the blind guy's like, when we lose our sight, the other senses become more attuned, and I can tell you're having steak and wine. He's like, well, I'm the boss. In the land of the blind, even the one-eyed man is king. Like, complete pop. Like, the minute he steps out, you're like, boy, this guy's going to get it. Well, how do you know? Because the rest of the guys in this movie have gotten it. So this guy's got to get it the worst. He's messing with blind people. So, at some point, the blind guys have had enough. And they all band together. And they grab this guy and his dog. They lure the dog away and lock it in a room. Then they grab this guy and they manhandle him and throw him in a closet, right? And he's there for like 2 or 3 days. And they don't feed his dog. And they don't feed him. And he could hear them building something. And it's really quite terrifying because he's locked in the closet while these blind guys are building the first Halloween haunt maze. This is 1972. This is 1 year before Knott's. And they're, in the movie, building the first Scary Farm maze. They're building Trapped. This guy's locked in the closet. And like outside, you hear sawing and hammering and wood moving around. And they're building Trapped. And there's no safe word. So when they finally let him out, he's in a haunt maze. There's chicken wire and walls, and there's only one way to go. And he reaches a spot, and this is the thing that Daniel was talking about. It's a set of walls that get progressively closer together as you move down the hallway. And they're lined with razor blades. Those razors your dad used to use where you would open the top of the razor and put the razor down on and then screw it in. So they're double-sided. So these are stuck in the wall pointing out. And the only way to get through, he has to walk through the razor blade hallway. It's right out of Saw. It's right out of a haunt maze. I was like, oh my God, this is like looking at a blueprint. right? So he keeps getting cut until he reaches the other side, and he thinks like this is the way out. Of course, those of us watching know exactly what's going to happen, and the door up ahead is not the way out, and instead you see a little string pulling a pin out, and the door opening, and there's, of course, Shane, who hasn't eaten in the same amount of time the other guy hasn't eaten, and Shane's starving, and Shane takes a run at him. So the guy turns and starts to go back through the razor blade hallway, and the blind guy turns the lights out. So now we're all even, right? And that's where the stories end. And we're back in the catacombs with the robed Cryptkeeper man. And remember I talked about the brooch. The brooch is the key to the whole movie. Because they're trying to say, like, is this what's going to happen to us? And the guy's like, no. And if you know anything about screenwriting, the brooch is the indicator that it's already happened. That they were drawn to this catacombs because they're dead. Because each one of them has already met their comeuppance. The brooch was the Christmas present. She can't have the brooch on her shirt if she hasn't opened the Christmas present. And she hasn't opened the Christmas present if she hasn't murdered her husband. So it's all in the past. So the guy one of the first guys runs to leave, and it's a really bad effect. But you get the idea. He falls down this pit into a fiery lake. And that's when the Cryptkeeper goes, basically, without saying it, you're all in hell. And this is what you all deserve, and you're all here forever. And you can sit and chat with me, and we can go over your crimes, or you can jump in the lake. So this is a reasonably good movie, considering you can tell they're under budget constraints, and instead of going for gore and schlock, they went for suspense. They went for a quick jab. You know, the terror in this movie is like, boom, it comes really fast at you, and then they break from it. And you know what the other thing watching this, and this is because I watch a lot of movies. I've got studio, not prestige pictures, but good movies. You know, studio, middle of the road pictures like Dave, like Defending Your Life, like a bunch of movies. And they're all, the DVDs, the Blu Rays, have dirt on them. Like on the print. You can see dirt on the print when they're transferring it. This Tales from the Crypt, which comes in a Blu Ray double pack with Vault of Horror. This is from Scream Factory. And you know what? They cleaned it up. This Tales from the Crypt movie looked better than some of my quote-unquote legitimate star-driven picture discs that I have. And I was impressed. Like, wow, it looked really clear. Beautiful picture, high-def quality. Blood is redder than red, you know. 60s, late 60s, early 70s vibe to it. A really cool flick. I want to thank my good friends CW and Elizabeth for recommending it and letting me borrow it. It's a great flick. The guy's the Cryptkeeper, and it's terrifying. This isn't a movie your kids are going to watch. Your kids are going to fall asleep or they're going to run out because it's way too slow for them. But, you know, for us adults who want more than just limbs getting hacked off every 2 seconds, this is what you're looking for. Now, I read somewhere that this is the movie Robert Zemeckis watches all the time when he wants to watch a horror movie, because that's what this is. It's the horror of what we humans do to each other, which is worse than any ghost or goblin story you can make up, right? Now, as far as the Cryptkeeper goes, the guy does a pretty good job. He's sinister. You don't know what he's up to till the very end. You know, he's not Satan. He's the Cryptkeeper. He's keeping the crypt. And eventually, like I said, the Cryptkeeper would be replaced by the Kevin Yeager puppet. Now, what's interesting is I used to watch all those shows. I bought the dolls when they came out. I had 12-inch talking Cryptkeeper dolls from Spencer Gifts. I had some of the little 4-inch figures, which were 5-inch, which were really badly made. But the Cryptkeeper there was a big push in the early to mid 90s to like make the Cryptkeeper a thing. Like he was a thing. And then, you know, Knott's actually signed a deal in 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, around those years. We had the Cryptkeeper in the park, and I got to work with the amazing puppeteers behind the Cryptkeeper traveling puppet that they used. And more importantly, for a writer, I got to write dialogue for him. The Cryptkeeper was in the 2001 Hanging, and Ken Parks and I co-wrote that show together, and both of us were able to put words in the Cryptkeeper's mouth, which I thought was really cool. Like, I grew up watching this character, and here I am writing stuff that then goes to New York, and John Cassier, who does the voice, was put in a booth, and he read the dialogue. And then it came back, and we were plopping it in the show, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I wrote stuff for the Cryptkeeper. How great is that? And then we had to write dialogue for this character named Bob, the marketing guy, who didn't like the Cryptkeeper. So we had to comment on the Cryptkeeper. And the best joke that we wrote was, he takes a look and he goes, "What is that thing? It looks like Jim Henson took a crap." Really funny stuff, man. We made a movie with the Cryptkeeper. They sent us these really high-quality Cryptkeeper masks. And we made, remember Dawson's Creek? We made Dawson's Creep, where Joey, the Katie Holmes character, is in a boat, but it's not Dawson she's making out with. It's the Cryptkeeper, and she ends up macking with him, and you see tongue, and then she reaches up in her mouth and takes out his tongue that she's bitten off and gives it back to him. It was really cute. We called it Dawson's Creep. But, it was fun, like, to go from seeing a character and then writing for them. That's a really satisfying jump to make. And I've also written a few jokes for Elvira, which was like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So I've been really lucky to be in the right place at the right time to get my talents put in those areas, And the Cryptkeeper was a real highlight because it was one of the first big high-profile things that I did. So this movie just brought back a lot of really fun memories. It's a great movie. It does make me want to watch the Zemeckis version of All Through the House to see, because I know Zemeckis made it really, really bloody and really dark and longer. It's like 45 minutes, I think. But again, thanks to CW and Elizabeth for recommending this great flick. It's the Halloween season, man, and it rolls on with monster movie. What better way to spend the Halloween season than watching a monster movie, right? And by monster movie, I mean, rubber monsters and guys in masks and fursuits, but also the monsters of Joan Collins and regular people, because what we do to each other is 10 times worse than what any monster could possibly do, right? I have no idea where you'd even pick this up. You could look on Amazon or eBay. Like I said, it's Scream Factory. It's a double pack of Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror on Blu Ray. Vault of Horror is the sequel. I'll have to watch that next, I guess. It's got Tom Baker in it from Doctor Who. 'Tis the season, folks. 'Tis the season for ghosts and goblins and trick-or-treating and all the stuff that makes Halloween great. Maintain those traditions. Halloween keeps slipping away from us a little bit every year, and it's up to us to keep the home fires burning, right? I love my Halloween memories, and every kid should have just as many of trick-or-treating and picking out the right costume and taking that stupid bag of cotton and trying to make spider webs out of it, or begging your mom like I did and getting her to buy me a block of dry ice, because somehow dry ice, man, and that little bit of fog it emits, that makes the night. That makes the night, man. So, I love Halloween. I love monster movies. I love doing this show, and they've all combined today. I am the voice. I am Jeff Tucker. Thanks for tuning in to the Vault of Horror known as 91 Reasons.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?